Taylor Ellwood with Magical Experiments here. And this week I thought I would do an episode on the Magical Experiments blog about, or podcast about, pop culture magic. And this came about because of a question that was brought up in the Magical Experiments. Actually, I had asked people if they had questions about pop culture, and one of them, Damien, who I've been interviewed by and who I'd love to have on the show here at some point, brought up some really interesting questions. So I decided I'd go ahead and answer them now. And he asked, the first question was, do you feel there's a connection between trauma and the pop culture of choice? And I'm going to go and address each of these questions. So, I wrote Pop Culture Magic, over 20 years ago at this point, believe it or not. And I've written 2 other books since then. And these are this is the current cover. And this is the Pop Culture Magic 2.0. And this is Pop Culture Magic Systems. And if you haven't picked those books up, you can definitely get them on my website. I'll mention that again at the end. But here's the first thing I'll say. I haven't seen a lot put out there on pop culture magic since I first wrote those books. There's been like 1 or 2 other people who've written something or another, and what I saw didn't really represent an evolution of pop culture magic. So when I think about pop culture magic and trauma, I think it's really interesting because that's a very interesting question. Are we basically choosing pop culture because of the trauma, or because there is potential trauma that we're processing? And I would say yes, to some degree that's true. I remember watching Neon Genesis Evangelion, and that basically was my go-to series for processing all the trauma that I had around my circumstances growing up, particularly my relationship with my dad. That show hit all the chords, and I worked through a lot of that stuff. And I would say even some of the other I would say even in general that when I look at pop culture and my interaction with it, that a lot of times that is informed by the particular vein of interest that I have at the time, but it's also informed by like the stuff that I'm working through. So for example, I'm playing Death Stranding right now, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's this game about this guy named Sam Bridges who runs around dropping off packages to other people. But it's in a post-apocalyptic world where if you die, you essentially void out and cause undead to show up. And if you're touched by like rain or water or anything like that, you actually have the potential for growing old because of time fall. Fascinating game, and one of the things that's really fascinated me about it is that I think it encompasses the modern man's dilemma or crisis around not being able to connect with people. And you watch this journey where this very solitary man starts learning how to connect with people. When I played it years ago, it struck me on a very deep chord, and now that I've done men's work for a couple of years, it still strikes me on a very deep level. And I'll probably end up writing an article about that on my Men's Mysteries podcast or Substack. But I mention it here because, again, pop culture has a tendency to definitely draw some stuff out. I mean, I remember playing God of War Ragnarok and, again, kind of being struck by, here's some really interesting themes about fathers and sons, and being able to relate to some of that. Not as much, because I'm not a father myself, but definitely being able to relate to it to some degree. And enjoying the game more because it touched on some deeper parts of myself that I was working on healing at the time. So I think that a lot of times, if we take that into pop culture magic, that pop culture magic does present a potential avenue for exploring trauma and healing. It depends on what people are doing with it, obviously. But I think that's a really good question, and it's worth exploring and unpacking. And so for those of you who are watching this, I'd be curious, especially if you've done pop culture magic, what has stood out to you about your practice of pop culture? Do you agree with that idea that pop culture, like your pursuit of pop culture magic, might represent an exploration of some trauma for you? Or at least if your interest in pop culture goes down that vein, I'd love to hear about that. The next question that he asked was, do you think there's a way to use it for better, or do you think there's a way to use it for a better way to use pop culture spirits? Okay, that was a little akin to demons in a not. Okay, do you think there's a way to better engage or collaborate with pop culture spirits? Well, I mean, as with any other approach to spirit work, which I teach, I do teach a relational model, a collaborative model. So that's kind of the way that I've approached it. I think that what I saw like in early chaos magic writings was kind of akin to how so many people approach spirit work, which is more of a servant based modality. I don't really agree with that modality. I think that it's problematic on numerous different levels, and I also accept the fact that people are going to do what they're going to do. Do I think there's a better approach? Sure. Build a relationship with the spirit, connect with it, learn how to work with it in a holistic and respectful manner. That can, in and of itself, be useful. And do you think there's better? Do you think they're better for tasking like servitors as opposed to spirit-based work like asking for guidance and invocation and internal work? Um, no, I don't. I don't know that I really think of it that way. That's such a categorical approach in some ways, and I get why, because so many people. That's what so many people do is spirit work. But no, I think that like really, I mean, this even informs my approach to working with entities and servitors and stuff. Is that again, my approach is relational. It's about building relationships with, and collaboration and connection. So I think that I don't think pop culture spirits are better for specific types of tasks. I think it again all depends on what you do to invest in that relationship, and that makes a significant difference right there. And then he asked, do you think pop culture needs to grow up? And if there's more work in this field, perhaps it'd be wiser to find more nuanced ways to work at it than obsess over proving it to others. Or having astral sex with Sephiroth. Yeah, well, I'm not interested in trying to prove pop culture magic to anyone else anymore. I mean, my days of doing that were over 20 years ago. And you know what? I did prove it. I wrote 3 books on the topic, and people all over the world are drawing on pop culture magic as a viable way to practice magic. So I don't think that pop culture magic needs to prove anything, and that anyone who practices needs to prove anything. I mean, really, at the end of the day, just do your magical work. That's what matters. So, do I think it needs to grow up? If people are still stuck in trying to prove it, then yes, I do. I think that like any other magical path, it really boils down to what are you doing to you? How are you using this to help you become a better person? How are you using this to help you get the results that you want in your life? How are you using this to transform your life? These are all great questions to ask, and at the end of the day, they can only be asked and answered in an individual way. I will just fully and freely acknowledge that I don't do a lot of pop culture magic anymore. And it's not because there isn't stuff to do there. It's because my interests have taken such a radical departure. I mean, part of it's just doing the men's work, but part of it is also just doing a lot more somatic and body based work with spirits and energy work and things like that. And that's not really something that's gotten into much with pop culture magic. I do think that the exploration of AI and magic is kind of where the evolution of pop culture magic is going, and there is some interesting work going on in that field. And I hope that people really will take it and evolve it past what I wrote about, because as I said, the books that I have seen that have been put out there for the most part haven't significantly changed the dialogue about what pop culture magic is about. Um, and that's fine. It is what it is. I'm pleased with my work. I feel like it's provided a valuable foundation. And I would say, really, if you haven't read like Pop Culture Magic 2.0, definitely check it out, because that book is an evolution of the original Pop Culture Magic, and there are some very interesting themes and explorations there. A huge part of it really boils down to culture and exploring it from a cultural perspective. And that's something that I think is an interesting challenge, because really, we don't actually live in a culture. We live in a society, at least in North America. We live in a society as opposed to a culture. And there's a very real difference there. So one of the things that we have to actually do is actively create our own culture with other people. And that's where I think Pop Culture Magic has an opportunity to grow, and of course a challenge. And then he asked, is it a beginner's approach to magic and or highly contextual? As if to say, by the time you build a truly workable system or experiment or refine it, you could have just learned and tweaked something that has a proven record. Well, I don't know that Pop Culture Magic is a beginner's practice, for one thing. I think that you have to have a certain foundational level of magical expertise and knowledge before you just jump into it. And one of the mistakes that I do see is that some people will be like, well, I'm into magic, but I really don't want to spend the time learning what other people did, so I'm going to go and create my own system of pop culture magic. And yeah, that's great, and you don't have the foundational level of knowledge that you need. I mean, yes, I'm all about magical experimentation, but I'm about magical experimentation with proper research, proper understanding of where you came from, so to speak. And that's a weakness that I see when people get caught up in the idea that they don't have to know how magic works, or that they don't have to figure out the overall process or practice, all that stuff. I'm like, no, not necessarily. I think you really do. So I don't see pop culture magic as a beginner's practice. I think it actually takes a lot of sophisticated awareness to be able to create a system of magic out of pop culture. I also would say that that yes, you can work with a quote unquote proven system, but one of the values and benefits of working with pop culture magic is that it gives you a chance to develop your own system. You've learned certain foundational pieces. Now you map them to pop culture, and then you start to make that your own system, and that can be a really powerful and effective source of magical work. So I don't know that I would say that pop culture magic is just a beginner practice. I mean, you're going to experiment and refine. I mean, I've seen that there are people out there who are doing some amazing work with pop culture magic in terms of what they're experimenting and refining. So I think it's really important to understand that and appreciate the depth of the work involved and how such things occur. Pop culture magic is, I think, an integral part of magic. You know, the development of pop culture magic is also something that kind of is an evolution in a person's practice, because when you start to develop your own system, then you are truly graduating into becoming a magician. I mean, I guess I would say really that pop culture magic was the first meta system that I developed, if you will. Because really what I did is I described how to ultimately create a given system of pop culture magic using pop culture and drawing upon the foundational practices of magic. So that's my thoughts on the state of pop culture magic. I thought it was an interesting set of questions. I am curious to see what people write about or comment on in response to some of the things that I shared. And if you're interested in getting these books, here they are again. You can order them on my website at magicalexperiments.com/pop-culture-magic series. And in fact, you can just go and go to my website and check them out. Of course, you can get them in other places and get started reading. All right, thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.